Hey, I'm Steve Krentz for Guitar Gathering. Thank you for joining us with this closing lesson on some simple chord inversions. This time we're going to be talking about chord inversions that you really need to know. These are the chord inversions that I play every day in my professional life. So there's a PDF that goes along with this lesson. You can find the link to that in the YouTube description down below, and that will get you to the PDF. Now, we've already talked about an introduction to chord inversions. We already talked about some jazz chord inversions. This one we're going to talk about a little bit more practical, everyday inversions that is going to kick up your guitar playing. So different chords. So instead of just playing, maybe a G, I could play a G with a B in the bass. Instead of playing a D, I can play a D with an F sharp in the bass. And these little variations in the chord can really create some interesting variations in your chord playing. So let's take a look at it. Go ahead and whip out that PDF, and let's flip over to page 3 of your PDF, because we've already covered the first couple of pages in the previous lesson. And we're going to be talking about these most helpful chord inversions. These are the ones that I use when I'm playing professionally, whether live or in the studio here in Nashville. So these are, I didn't write every one of them down, but I wrote just the main ones that I use a lot. So a lot of these may be unfamiliar fingerings to you. Don't let that throw you. It just takes a few, weeks, days, weeks, and putting them into some progression to get them underneath your fingers. Don't just play through them and think you got them. You got to incorporate them into your actual skills that you know. Once you can apply them, then you know you've really got a concept. Okay, so take a look at the first one. The first line there. I talk about chord inversions that have the third of the chord. Remember, chords are built off of the first step, the root, then the third and the fifth, some type of third, some type of fifth. And for a major chord, it's 1, 3, 5. For a minor chord, it's 1 flat 3, 5. For an augmented, it's 1, 3 sharp 5. So there's different variations that happen on that third and the fifth. But if it has the third in the bass, we call that the first inversion. If it has the root in the bass, we call that a root position. But if it has the third step of the scale in the bass, the lowest tone, that is called the first inversion. So I gave you some of the easy ones there. Here's a D. Okay? Now everybody's going to play that D. Now another option that you can play is if you switch your fingers around, we have a D with an F sharp in the bass. So you'll see a D slash F sharp. That F sharp underneath the slash is not another chord or anything, and that's just telling you what note is supposed to be the lowest pitch, the bottom notes. Okay, D with an F sharp in the bass. I've got my second finger here on the 6th string of the 2nd fret. And I'm not playing the 5th string. I'm kind of muting it out by this finger. His little part of it is just touching that string. It deadens it out. I have an open D, I have an A, and then I have a D here with my pinky. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Steve, can't I just play it like this? You sure can, but here's the problem with that. You'll find that as you use this chord, it tends to be in the key of D, which we're going to a lot of G chords, or maybe you're in the key of G and you're using a D chord there. So in the musical situation that you're going to find this chord in, you're going to find that it's much easier to use it with the second finger as the lowest pitch. Okay? So yes, this is exactly the same chord, but you'll find this isn't near as useful because when you put it into progressions, because where you're going, it doesn't tend to work that way. Second finger in the bass. D with an F sharp in the bass. Okay, what about a G chord? If I have a G chord, everybody would play that. Another option you can do is a G with a B in the bass. So I keep my pinky where he is at, and I'm going to put my first finger on the 5th string at the 2nd fret, and it's open, open, third finger on the D there, and I have a G with a B in the bass. It's a very melodic sounding chord with that third in the bass. It's not as strong and stable as the root position. There's the root position. There's the third. Do you hear the difference? It's the same chord, just a different sound. Okay? That's a great one to learn. Here's another one, an A with a C sharp in the bass. Now, remember you can do an A. A lot of guys do an A like this. If you just reach over with your third finger, got to kind of angle your hand a little bit, play those inside strings, you get an A with a C sharp in the bass. An A chord with its third in the bass. Now, if you'll notice, I'm not playing any open strings, so I could move that chord around, but you got to find where the root is. There's the A, 3rd string, 2nd fret. That's the A in our A with a C sharp in the bass. So if I wanted to B flat chord, I got to move it up to a B flat and then form the chord like that. So that's another option for you. Let's go back to our open chords. What about a C? Well, if I just add the low E into it, the 6-string low E, that's a C with an E in the bass. Perfectly good. Now, I want you to listen to something. When I have that low E and this C right next to each other, it gets a little muddy. It gets a little muddy down there. So what I tend to do on this chord is I don't play this C, this 5th string C, and I just play the low E and the rest of the chord. An E, a G, and a C there. And see how that immediately clears it all up? As opposed to this. Watch that. Having 2 low notes close together muddies things up. So if you have a low note, you want to give some space before the next note appears. So that's the C with an E in the bass. That one's an easy one. Here's an F. F triad. If I just add that 5th string A to it, that works. That's an F with an A in the bass. But I know you're saying to yourself, Steve, how come this sounds muddy and this doesn't sound muddy? It's just a little higher in the register. Once you kind of get out of the basement of our note choices, where it gets, the lower you get, the muddier it's going to get. The higher you get, the clearer it's going to get. So even though this is the same interval as this, it sounds a little bit clearer because it's just everything's higher up. Okay, so those are some good chords that I use all the time, kind of open versions of a chord that has the 3rd in the bass. Now, look at the next line. Some of these can be changed to become a movable chord. And so we learn one form and then we can suddenly do any chord we want to in any key. That's what we're looking for. So take a look at this E with a G sharp in the bass. Now, wait a minute. Now look at the chord right above it on the first line, the D with an F sharp in the bass. You have a 2nd, you have an open string, 3rd finger, and 4th finger. If I just scoot that up, now the open string, I've got to put a finger back here to catch what the open string was doing. I do it up 1 more fret. It's the same chord. It's the same shape as the D with the F sharp. Do you see that? This is using an open string. If I just move up 2 frets, put my first finger back here to compensate for where that open string was, then I've got the same type of voicing, but I can throw it in any key. Here's an E with a G sharp in the bass. Now these are movable, so you notice you've got a little diamond there on these. The diamond on the 4th string is telling you it's the root. The E in our E with a G sharp in the bass is here. But Steve, what if I wanted maybe an A flat chord with a C in the bass? Well, I've got to make my first finger, which is the root, I've got to make it an A flat, so there's an A flat, and then build everything else around it. There you go. Now, it's a big stretch. I know it is a big stretch between this 2nd finger and this 1st finger. But a little bit of practicing it will help open that up for you. These larger stretches, don't get frustrated because you can't do them the first time. You can get them, you just your hand needs to get used to forming that. So that's one, E, the G sharp in the bass. Another option with a 5th string bass note would be like a B flat with a D in the bass. Look at that next one on the 2nd line, 2nd form. Wait a minute, that kind of looks familiar. Let's take off our pinky, and I'm left with this. That looks exactly like our A with a C sharp form. I just moved it up a half step. Added my pinky on the 2nd string, and I got a different form. As long as I put it on a chord tone, everything works. B flat with a D in the bass. I threw some other ones just to give you some other options there. If I'm doing a more of a jazz situation where I've got a B flat major 7th, a great version I use of that is a B flat major 7th with a D in the bass right here. There's a B flat major 7th. If I just bar my 1st finger, I get this D in the bass. Really pretty sounding chord. Very very beautiful sounding chord. Hey, here's another trick you can do for that chord. If I come down here and put it on the 2nd fret, I've got a G major 7th with a B in the bass, right? If I put an E at the bottom of that, I get one of the best sounding E minor 7ths on the guitar. It's actually an E minor 9th. If I take my 3rd finger off and I leave this bar here, I get a beautiful E minor 11th. It'll substitute for an E minor, and it sounds great and very melodic. And it's the same form as the last one on that line, that B flat major 9th. So here's where we started. If I add the A down, go down the 1st finger, if I take my 3rd finger off, all of these are variations of the same chord. That shape right there. Okay? So we've done some forms with the 3rd in the bass. We've done some forms that are open. We've done some forms that are movable. Let's take a look at the bottom of that page, and you get some with the 5th in the bass. Okay? Some good open forms of that. This would be the 2nd inversion. Here's a C. Remember, if I add the 6th string, I got the E in the bass. But if I move my 3rd finger down to the G, and I kind of mute out that 5th string, I get a C with a G in the bass. So here's the C. Here's the C with a G in the bass. Still a C chord, it just sounds a little bit different. So now you've got 3 different options for a C chord. This chord, this chord, or this chord. All the same chord, just you're varying the bass note. That's a good one. That's a good one to use, let's say you're doing a progression like maybe G, and then you want to go to a C with a G in the bass, back to a G. Great little pattern that you can play on guitar. Hey, look at the next one. If you're doing a C major 7th, and I think it was Jonathan Butler, the great smooth jazz guitarist I learned this from. If you add this is a C major 7th, the notes in a C major 7th are a C, E, G, and a B. Now, if I put the B and the C right next to each other, you end up with this rather awkward form, but if I add a G in the bass, it gets an even more undefined sound. A great option for, let's say you're doing a progression. It's just a wonderful, kind of rather undefined C major 7th sound that you can put in there. Hey, let's look at another one. Here's a D. We were talking about the D with an F sharp in the bass, but I've got an A right there underneath it on the 5th string open. I could just do that. Do you hear the difference? Listen for the difference. Here's the D. Here's the D with an A in the bass. Adds a little bit more grit and growl down there on the bottom. Now, another way to do it, if I play a D like this, and I play it, put my pinky down here on the 6th string at the 5th fret, I get another D with an A in the bass. And this one is particularly handy if you're doing stuff like there's an A. Hey, wait a minute, does that sound familiar? That sounds an awful lot like... Because it's the same thing. If I just move up, compensate for the open strings, and then I put the other notes in there. Does that sound familiar at all? Okay, it's right out of a little bit of Rolling Stones there for you. So that's some forms that you can do there. All right, flip the page, flip the page. All right, so now let's put some of these forms to work. All right, now I just gave you, whatever, 10 different forms there. It's going to take you a while to get those underneath your fingers. Don't get discouraged that you can't do them the first time. It takes a while to kind of build up. But these are the ones that change progressions. Like if that first progression, it's basically a D for a measure. This is the top of page 4. a G for a measure, an A for a measure, and a D for a measure. So every other guitar player on the planet is going to play this. That's fun and all, but we can do more with it, and we can use these inversions to help get us to other chords. So here I'm going to play the D, and I'm going to throw in a D with an F sharp, to the G, G with a B in the bass, A with a C sharp, to the D. Listen to how that bass note helps when you're jumping from that third, the F sharp, to the G. It kind of helps us get there. I'll do it again. Do you see how our progression suddenly has life? It has dimension. It has movement. It's not just changing from this chord to that chord to that chord. It's walking up to it. And that little movement, all I'm doing is playing with inversions there, and it makes for a much more interesting progression to listen to as you're playing. Okay, take a look at the next one. Okay, just to get us some practice on some of these other open forms, I'm doing the same thing, which is basically the one chord starting in C, going to the 4 chord in F, next measure, going to the 5 chord, the third measure, G, and then back to a C. 1, 4, 5, 1. That's kind of the standard way that you would play that, but we want to try and break beyond that. So we're going to do a C, E in the bass, F, F with an A in the bass, G, G with the B in the bass, C. Do it again. C in the E in the bass, F, F with an A in the bass, G, G with the B, C. One more time. We did a lesson, it's probably about maybe 8 or 10 lessons back, talking about easy chord moves. And a lot of times you can take a chord, and basically the gist of that was I can take one note, finger of that chord, and just move it off and on, and you can add different textures of the chord. I'm just taking a chord tone and moving it around. So if I add that concept into, now I've got my inversions. Let's see what we can come up with. A much more interesting progression, I'm just moving one note in each chord form, plus I've added these inversions. Take a look at the next one down there. This is the third line on page 4. Okay, so let's get some practice with these movable forms. I've got an F, same thing, a 1, 4, 5, but I'm going to do it in F. F, B flat, C, back to F. But if I did an F, and then I did an F with an A in the bass, then I did a B flat with a D in the bass, C with an E in the bass, to lead me back to that F. So if I did all that together, there you go. I'm messing with that bass line. I'm creating some melodic interest with that bass line. Okay, and for our last one, I thought I would throw in some of those jazz versions that we talked about in the previous lesson. Remember how we did major sevenths, where jazz inversions, we did minor sevenths, sevenths. And I thought I would throw a few of these in there. So what do we have here? We've got an F major seventh. This is the fourth example there on page 4. F major seventh. Then an F major seventh with an A in the bass, which leads us to that B flat. Hey, here's that B flat major 7 with a D in the bass. And then I thought I would do a G minor, and then go through all the variations of that. And then here's one of my favorite walk-ups in the world, that last measure, C7. I'm going up to this version of a C with an E in the bass, and I'm just going to walk up with a B flat with a D, B with a D sharp, C with an E. Very jazzy way to do that. So here we go. If I played the last one there, I'll give them a jazz 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. I'll do it again. See how that leads way up? Very nicely back to that F. So there you go. There's some inversions, the most common ones that I tend to do in my own playing here in Nashville. And I've got some open versions, we've got some movable forms, we've got the third in the bass, we've got the fifth in the bass. Suddenly you're playing, instead of just a C, you're able to do all kinds of different things with that C. You've got all these different options. There you go. I hope you have gotten some things out of it. Work on these. Don't worry if you can't get them the first time. Just try and incorporate these into your playing. That's what it's all about. Hey, I'm Steve Krentz for Guitar Gathering. Keep up the great work in your learning. Your music matters. We'll see you next time.